Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. I am back, I am better, and I have news for you. And the news are good. So let's start and we go right into the southern side to talk about what's happening with the counteroffensive and how things are looking up in general. First, let's cover the obvious things, the advances of Ukrainian armed forces. Yesterday, the confirmation that Ukrainian forces have taken over the settlement of Pitikhatki. It's one of the larger settlements in the area, has been confirmed. It has been also confirmed that in this village there was a battalion from the South Ossetia. It's like one of the, I believe, regions that is occupied by Russia near Georgia. That was present in the area, and that battalion has been encircled and either destroyed or taken captive. All the Russian propaganda channels were crying about it really bad. But generally speaking, this direction is extremely important for Russians because this is what opens kind of slowly the way towards Vasilievka. They have a lot of fortifications in the area, but let's just say that losing settlement after settlement after settlement in this area doesn't really help the confidence, especially because this is like the shortest way towards Tokmak. That's not really that great, because if Ukrainians can get to Vasilievka, if they can get to these highways, then it's like Tokmak, Melitopol, you name it, there is a highway for it. It's really, really nice for Ukraine. With other things, we also know that there is advances south of Novodanilovka. This is Orekhiv direction. This is where Robotyne is. This is, to put more perspective, where the Russians have posted all of these propaganda about destroyed Bradleys. So there is stuff happening there as well. Again, map is not showing all of the things, but it does show certain things. Interestingly, Rivnopil, which is around the Velika Novoselka direction, Rivnopil, there has been claims that Russians have left Rivnopil, but Ukrainians have not entered and taken it yet. Reasons for that I don't know, but basically so far nothing can say that taking of Rivnopil has concluded. And right now there is no reports for me that it's being assaulted. So my guess is that Ukrainians are right now more interested in something like Novodonetsk or Staromayorsk, because obviously Staromlinivka is the ultimate goal of Ukrainians. If Ukrainians can get through Staromlinivka, then Russians are royally screwed in this direction. Additionally, we hear of some certain advances. I already mentioned it to you around the Vuhledar-Pavlivka area. It's not completely clear where they are. Maybe on the Vuhledar area, what is meant when I hear reports is this part right here. So take it with the same way as I do. People say there are advances in Vuhledar area for a couple hundred meters a day, but no kind of precise kind of markings that can describe where exactly it is. I haven't seen videos and I don't have direct reporting from that. So potentially it's these fields right here. So like Ukrainians clearing minefields and so on. But let's kind of take a step back and think about whether what we're seeing is good or not. If you believe the armchair generals of what's happening with the war in Ukraine, what's happening with the Ukrainian military, how they are advancing, the tempo of advancements, and they will say, "Oh my God, Georgie, like what has been like almost a week past, and Ukrainians have taken maybe like one settlement, cleared some of the fields, and that's it." That tempo is so slow, and they would be completely wrong. Why? I think the best one that explained this, for me not to delve in it too deep, was Jake Bro. Jake Bro has shown basically what Normandy Beach and taking of France looked at the start of the D-Day on the 6th of June, and then what it looked like a month after. And it was like a minuscule piece of land that was held by the Allies. It's because that initial first step is always the hardest. It's that initial first step takes the longest, because that is grinding through the prepared offensive lines of the enemy. And this is what Ukraine is doing right now. And to put you in a perspective, I've kind of dug into what's the actual assessment on the ground. Like, how do people on the ground are seeing this? And the reports are that the operation is being conducted surprisingly like no, it's like that the tempo and the tempo and the speed of operation is happening surprisingly fast, and it's going surprisingly well. And I was surprised, right? Because as for you as for me, that doesn't look like it. It looks like, well, map, settlement here and there. But that's because I'm an amateur. I'm not a military expert, and that's why these guys, they had to explain to me as well. So I'm going to explain it to you. So the thing is that what is happening right now, as I already explained, is getting through the enemy lines. But more importantly, the clearing of territory, the taking over towns is not necessarily the right indicator, because what Ukrainian military is doing is they're trying to prepare for their operation. So they need to prepare the battlefield conditions, so the so-called shaping operations. But they're not only shaping the battlefield, for example, like taking certain heights or taking certain villages and so on. They also making a shaping operation into shaping their enemy. So as I explained before, they have been basically unloading on the Russian backline. A lot of these initial advances, a lot of these initial pokes, a lot of these probing attacks were able to reveal where the Russian artillery and their main assets are. So that's why we've seen last week major strikes on the command posts, on the troop concentrations. Since the start of June, there has been over 300 artillery pieces of Russia destroyed. Think about this. 300 pieces destroyed since the start of June. It's an incredible tempo. Russia has been pulling out their heavy equipment. So the tanks that Russia was there pulling at first towards the front line to help stop the Ukrainian offensive, because they thought that they're doing it. And as Ukraine started just destroying them, because remember, the south side of Ukraine is an open field, they were sitting ducks here. So now we hear that Russians are actually pulling a lot of these heavier equipment kind of away from the front line. And that basically is the shaping part. Hitting Russians where it hurt. Like, for example, yesterday, Ukrainians hit one of the most important storage facilities. For a longer time, Ukraine has known that they're, like, if you see this white line here, this is the railway. And this railway is basically how Russians were feeding in all the supplies and everything else to the southern front. And around this settlement of Rikove, they had this big facility of storage and redistribution facility, basically, where they just get stuff off of a train and then deliver it towards other parts of the front line. And Ukrainians knew about this for a while. So now, when the time came, now Ukrainians suddenly decided, okay, now we're striking it. Now this major facility is gone, and Russians need to readjust. Besides, we already talked before that the railways have been already sabotaged multiple times, and they're continuing being sabotaged as we are talking. So railway disruption is happening quite intensively by both Ukrainian partisans and the Ukrainian armed forces. All things prepared, we see that Ukraine is really shaping the battlefield into its favor. Secondly, what I did additionally is I decided to follow up with the people that were critiquing Ukraine for its offensive operations in Kharkiv and Kherson. And when I'm saying critiquing, not in a sense that, like, Russians or any kind of shills saying that Ukraine lost 100,000 different troops. No, it was some commanders and military experts that actually know what they were talking about. And they were just saying that some of the tasks and some of the ways Ukraine has acted was not the best. And they were saying that from what they're seeing right now, from what they're hearing and looking at how the situation is developing on the battlefield, Ukraine has learned from its mistakes significantly. Firstly, the Kharkiv operation. So around the Kharkiv operation, there was a lot of issues that Ukraine just didn't have enough forces. Now it's known that Ukraine has enough forces for this operation. They took their time to prepare those forces, so they didn't just rush into the battle without getting the logistics ready. One of the major criticisms was that Ukraine was advancing actually too fast for its own sakes in Kharkiv. So once they were taking territory, there wasn't enough troops flowing in with enough supplies of ammunition and so on to, for example, stop Russian forces from retreating. So in that sense, in a military sense, taking a bit of a slower approach is actually more favorable in a sense, because then your logistics are not as strained. Then you, for example, instead of letting your enemy escape, you actually can trap that enemy and destroy it in the pocket if necessary. Again, it's a little bit not applicable right now because the advances are just so slow, but we will see how the situation will develop after that. Secondly, for the Kherson offensive, one of the biggest criticisms that a lot of Ukrainians said on themselves is that the initial part of the offensive, because, and this is where important contexts are, we are noticing that Ukraine is losing certain vehicles and so on because those are Western vehicles. So those are the vehicles, that we recognize, Bradleys, Leopard tanks, and so on. However, when we would compare that to the start of the Kherson offensive, we would actually be shocked because during the Kherson offensive, Ukraine lost both in manpower and equipment significantly more than it's losing right now on the southern front line, which is incredible for what the Ukrainians are saying. They are saying that we have learned from our mistakes. The general staff has learned from its mistakes. They are not trying to rush straight into the fortified enemy positions with like a whole brigade worth of units. So we're using like smaller groups. We're using smaller scouting parties, probing attacks and so on. We are finding out where the enemy is. We are preparing for our advances. So we're actively using our artillery. We're actively using our mine clearing equipment. Like if you've seen videos lately, you've seen a lot of these mine clearing equipments being used. And Ukraine is doing a very steady and very thorough job with their offensive right now compared to what they did in Kherson. So, for example, something that we haven't discussed after the Kherson offensive is that Ukraine actually in the initial stages of Kherson offensive lost quite a lot of men because they were trying to advance way too fast into the prepared enemy positions and they were throwing way too much forces. So all in all, together with the fact that I already described in two previous videos that that Russians have engaged their operational reserves, and yes, I said strategic reserves, that was wrong. Russia does not have strategic reserves right now, but operational reserves they have for this, that Russia has used up a significant part of their strategic operational reserves. Oh my God, here I go again. We now see that all the military analysts, the people for whom this actually makes sense, not the layman that just opens the map and says, well, I see 2 villages taken, doesn't look like that big anyway. But for the military people, when they're looking at what Ukraine is doing, at what kind of forces it's utilizing, how much of these forces are utilizing, and what kind of results it's achieving with even like some of the just smaller parties are being able to like encircle like a whole battalions of troops like Russians even acknowledge themselves. That is incredible. So they are saying that the offensive is advancing surprisingly well, despite maybe us normal people not recognizing it that much. But the thing is that we should take away from this that this might be a slower process because Ukraine wants to do this very thoroughly. And while it destroyed 300 systems, the 300 artillery systems, remember there's probably 300 or 500 or 600 artillery systems more. We now know that Ukraine is again targeting logistics, Ukraine is targeting command. It needs time to soften Russians up. And at some point, when Russians will be softened up, when their logistics are not going to be able to supply the necessary amount of equipment, where they're not going to have enough guns to sustain any kind of defensive fires against the upcoming troops, Ukraine will strike. And at that moment, it's going to be obvious what was happening for this whole month, maybe 2 months. I don't know how long this stage will go. We will instantly see the results being represented by the territory that is being delivered. So I hope this explanation that I received during the last week will help you also catch up on what's the situation on the front line and generally understand what we should be looking out for. Besides that, additional good news, Ukrainians around Avdiivka have been counterattacking. Again, it's a small tactical things, but they have claimed to liberated the village of Vesele, or at least the main majority of its parts. So Deep State didn't color its soul, but it definitely helps because it relieves pressure off of Avdiivka, and it's just a nice thing to have. Around Bakhmut, so here Russians, surprisingly, some of the reserves from Kherson region were actually sent to Russia to get some more troops into that regiments, and now they're being sent to Bakhmut. So Russia is trying to reinforce Bakhmut because they are seeing how the situation is developing not to their favor. As you can see, the changes slowly but surely are happening towards Ukrainian side, and this is the same as I said before. Ukrainians are continuing exactly in the same directions. They're continuing advancing maybe 200, 300 meters per day, taking additional trenches, taking additional positions, getting closer to those more of the operational level targets like the hills above Klishivka, for example. And that's great. That's really good news because the 3rd Assault Regiment, the ex-Azov Kiev guys, a really nice one, the videos that we always see from Bakhmut right now, they're saying that this is just part 1 of what they have in preparation for Russians. And they say as soon as we're over with part 1, Russians will be in a very, very, very dire positions because the surprises that they have prepared are big. So that was very, very nice for me to hear. In other news, around the direction of Kupiansk, Dvorichna, I actually should probably use red for this. So around these direction in the north, Russians have been ordered essentially to go into attack. They've been ordered to create some kind of distraction to try to distract Ukrainian troops and to create essentially problems for Ukrainian military, so in order to draw some attention into this. I don't expect Ukraine to do it because the defensive positions of Ukrainians in these areas are strong, so just something to be aware of if you will stumble upon news. Overall, the situation is good. Ukrainians are doing a great job. As I said, when not looking just at the map and the map changes, when actually talking with military analysts that are following the situation and know what they're talking about, they're saying that this is incredible what is happening. Situation is really, really favoring Ukraine. We are in a turning point of this war, and we will soon see whether Zaluzhny, well, I mean, like, not really whether Zaluzhny is good or not, because we already know that he is good. But we're going to see the level of delusion of Russians, because I think one of the most fascinating stories of the last week was when, and I'm actually probably going to just switch to the vlogging camera for this, was that when Peskov said that Ukraine has been demilitarized, that they are saying that by the way, Ukraine is using a lot less Russian-made weapons, Soviet-made weapons, and they're using a lot of Western-style weapons, Western weapons. So therefore, that means that Ukraine is now demilitarized. And for me, it's a clear demonstration of. Remember, you asked me like, how would Russia be able to explain that they will need to leave Crimea, that Crimea is going to be retaken by Ukraine, that it's going to be kicked out of Ukraine entirely, and all of those arguments, they fail in recognizing that Russia doesn't really care about reality, it just describes whatever it wants. It doesn't really matter. So all in all, we hear and see that Russian government is completely out of touch with reality. I think that they're believing the Konashenkov spouting nonsense about 1,700 Bayraktars that they have destroyed, and so on and so on. Good stuff. Good luck for Ukraine. Slava Ukraini, trust in armed forces of Ukraine. I love you all, guys, and I'll see you next time.